Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to also thank the panel for your good work on this. I have two areas of questions. The first concerns the Office of the Ombudsman. I asked my office to send me some information just to check. I want to make sure that the panel is aware that Congress recently passed the Wounded Warrior Assistance Act of 2007, and I have not matched up what we passed with your recommendations. But I would urge you to take a look at that, and I don't know how the timing worked with your study and that act, but I think we really will probably need to take a look at that in light of your recommendations, and any help or guidance you could provide Congress on that, I think, would be helpful. One of the things that the Act did was it set up an office of an ombudsman in the Department of Defense. Section 102 of the Act sets up an overall office to coordinate, as I read it, other offices of ombudsman in the various military divisions. I'm hearing that while the Navy and the Marines have done a pretty good job with somebody, some office, some way to coordinate all the benefits, care, and services that may be available to the wounded warriors on that side, the Army has not. So one of the things that it sounds like we need to look at is making sure that there is specifically an Office of the Ombudsman, and perhaps at each medical facility, whose duty is to the soldier and their family, not to the armed services so much, but to the soldier and the family. Their duty runs to them to help them coordinate what they're going to have to go through. Is that, as a concept, something that you agree with?
Mr. Hodes, the answer is yes, and I think the Command Sergeant Major Holland has already indicated, and his indications are certainly those of the panel. In fairness to the Army and to Walter Reed, much has changed since we did our review, and they have in fact addressed the caseworker issue, the imbalance, put in rework the numbers, and so you will hear, I think, that has been, they have made an effort to address it. Whether the caseworker does what the Act requires is another matter to be looked at. Certainly from our perspective, the need for some advocate who can help guide individual service members and their families through that time when the service member cannot be expected to be thinking clearly, and when the family is tormented by anguish and concern, is one that we think the Army is trying to meet, but certainly what you have mentioned in the Act also seems a way to be helpful.
My concern is amplified by a meeting I had with a constituent at home recently. I met with the soldier and his wife. He's at Walter Reed. He described a similar story to that which we heard when we were there for testimony, you know, having to navigate 14 different signatures to have somebody say what he already had been told, which is he's blind in one eye, half blind in another, his arms busted in 13 places, having to show up for formation when he could hardly stand, with nobody to go to help him, a case manager who seemed more interested in telling him what he didn't need than what he did. So that, I mean, the concern is very personal for me with that constituent. The second question is perhaps briefer. General Jumper, I listened with interest when you talked about essentially an attitude issue. The same constituent that I met with described a suck-it-up soldier attitude to what he was dealing with. I don't think you can legislate attitude. How are we going to change the mindset from suck-it-up soldier to these are wounded patient soldiers who need our care? How are we going to change that attitude? Because I don't think we could pass an act that would do it.
Sir, I think that's a very good question. And indeed, it is the tradition of all of our military services to, as you say, suck it up. That's the way we look at things. I don't think the American people would want it any other way. However, when you transition yourself into this sort of an environment where you now involve families and loved ones, and indeed in a process where the families and loved ones are necessary to be able to coordinate all the activities of our more severely wounded warriors, then that's when compassion has to has to take over for a little of the suck it up attitude. I think everybody agrees with that. I think everybody agrees that it was probably a bit overboard in that direction, and that I know that the commanders that we've talked to have instituted steps to correct that and to pay more attention to the families and to the loved ones.
Thank you, gentlemen. His time has expired. Mr. Braley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And quite frankly, General, telling a patient suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder or traumatic brain injury to suck it up is counterproductive. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
And one of the problems that we have sitting up here is that when we had our first hearing at Walter Reed on March 5th, I asked General Shoemaker, General Cody, and the Acting Secretary Guerin if any of them could tell me how many patient advocates were serving the patient population at Walter Reed, because the Post article indicated not only were case managers being added to the population, but also patient advocates. And you know what they told me? None of them could answer the question. And I made a request at the end of that questioning for a clarification on what the number of patient advocates were, because it's contained in the Wounded Warrior Assistance Act, it's contained in your independent review, and nobody has answered my question. So when you want to talk about the frustration of inaction, it is on both sides of the table here. And one of the things that we have to do is get back to the point of view you talked about. One of the recommendations you made in your report has to do with employment assurances. My brother works at the VA hospital in Knoxville, Iowa, which has been on a yo-yo for 10 years on whether they're going to close the largest VA hospital in Iowa, spend $260 million of new facilities management, and move them to Des Moines, and they're losing their best employees who are going to other VA facilities around the country because no one is giving them that assurance. This is an endemic institutional problem that's got to change. And you have to be the voice to make it change, because, quite frankly, we're not getting a lot of answers on this end. One of the things that I think that is very important is you raised the point, General Rodman, about what is the cost of war. You've talked in your report about the advancements in medical care that are changing many former fatalities into wounded warriors with injuries that are frankly going to cost us staggering sums if we invest the money we should to take care of them. If you look at a life care plan for somebody with a traumatic brain injury or PTSD, the average life expectancy of a 19-year-old male, according to the U.S. Life Tables, is 57 years. You cost that out, it's a lot more than your $100,000 DOD death benefit. And yet we're not getting any information from the administration on what the long-term consequences of health care are for the casualties of this war. You have to use your platform to be an advocate for that, because that is a hidden cost that nobody's talking about. One of the things that was also frustrating to me is one of your recommendations deals with promoting education and research in prosthetic care, production, and amputee therapy, and we heard very compelling testimony about people with multiple amputations going back to active duty, performing valuable functions as active duty personnel, and yet we know when we're dealing with the rampaging cost of long-term health care that if we want them to be active throughout that 57-year life expectancy and not be a burden on our health care system, we've got to invest in the type of prosthetic care that keeps them active and functioning. And yet if you look at those DOD reimbursement schedules, they provide initial prosthetic care, and then they're left to fend for themselves. So what I want to emphasize is your value to this country and keeping this topic front and center, because we can have hearings until hell freezes over, we can pass these Assistance Act, but unless the military and Department of Defense do something to act on their recommendations, nothing's going to change.